Yo, so, like, before you criticize me, bro, for what I'm about to say, bro, just know, like, I'm 7 feet tall and I bench 5,000 pounds and, like, I pull hella women, bro. So, any criticism you have of me, just know that, like, you're wrong and you just need to get with some women, bro. So, like, just lock in, bro.
No, so seriously though, this is about mostly about the contest mode raid, somewhat about the normal raid, just some thoughts that I had, and just some stuff I need to get off my mind because I've been stuck in my head for the last day, and I just need to talk. So, firstly, I just want to preface we did not clear. I didn't clear a single encounter. I think I'll go into why I think that is, and maybe you guys can tell me if I'm coping or not. But just know this is from the bitter perspective of a guy who didn't clear. So firstly, I want to talk about the bugs. Holy, this was a buggy expansion launch and an even buggier raid. The raid itself was actually surprisingly consistent. It was mostly no bugs with the actual mechanics, but like damage glitches, the slow glitch where you could spawn in and just not be able to sprint, perks deactivating, half of the sandbox being disabled, outbreaks specifically being disabled, which would have been great for a lot of these damage phases, would have been significantly more accessible than 5 loadout swaps. Um, I'm probably going to show like the Sensei Leon list that he set up of all the bugs that he had observed. I know like some of them have been shown, whatever, or not shown. Some of them have been like talked about by Bungie. Some of them haven't. But this was an insanely buggy expansion. Like that just goes without saying. That's everybody's experience. So that's like the first major takeaway. The bugs were crazy this time around. Um, the next thing I want to talk about is ammo. The new ammo economy was something else. Um, and what that led to was a lot of people having to run significantly more total damage than is expected from one loadout. So you'd see things like I'm running a Thunderlord, and you're using your Thunderlord to farm super damage or to farm super energy, and then you'd use both of those things to get total damage, and then you'd run out of Thunderlord ammo, which is insane to think about running out of Thunderlord ammo in a damage phase. But that's what happened. And then, okay, what do? Well, the next best thing I can swap to is Lord of Wolves, which had its reserves cut out by 1/3, and they didn't put that in patch notes, so that was fun. But you'd swap to Lord of Wolves, and then you dump all of that and possibly get a super again from that damage. And then you'd still be in a damage phase. The damage phase would still have like 10 to 15 seconds left after you dumped all of your Thunderlord and all of your Lord of Wolves. Okay, so now you're swapping to a kinetic weapon, like a kinetic special, and like, okay, cool. But if you successfully dump all of that, that means that you're now headed into an ad phase with no ammo. You are a civilian on the streets of a town that has just been bombed out, and you're just walking around with your fists. And like, okay, that would have been fine last season when we had infinite ways to farm Transcendence, but this season with all the nerfs to Transcendence that were also unnoted in the patch notes, um that's significantly harder to achieve. And so that's my first major takeaway was wow, we are getting absolutely fried ammo wise. And that leads me into the general like console diff that I faced. You guys know I play on console. And I think this raid is probably the least cleared raid ever on console. That has been like a major day one raid race, because aside from a million loadout swaps, which are just slower to execute on console, which means that you're less likely to clear because you're already facing an inherent disadvantage. You have things like the Hydra eyes, not working correctly with rotational aim assist. And so you are trying to aim, and the game is pulling your aim back onto the Hydra behind the shield. You have stuff like imp swarms, which are just insanely difficult to shoot on a controller because you're pulled towards the middle imp. The side little flying around imps are very hard to aim at. You have the mobile crits on the Hobgoblin and Wyvern because they're staggering all over the place, and it makes hitting consistent crits on them insanely hard, basically impossible to be consistent with on a controller. And all of that made playing on a controller and like also on a console just much more punishing than I expected. And I just wanted to rant about that for a bit. But then you also have, aside from the console diff, you have stuff like the Sandbox reworks. So I talked before about how Lord of Wolves had its reserves removed. There were a ton of changes that they didn't tell us about like that. And there were so many changes like that, and so many things that were put in the patch notes incorrectly. Like, for example, Starfire Protocol, it was supposed to be buffed to 5% grenade energy per instance. It was instead nerfed from 2.5 to 2.3% grenade energy per instance, which is really cool. That was the entire game. Everything was like that. 600 RPM LMGs had their ammo reserves reduced to the point where 450 LMGs sometimes had more ammo than them. That's another thing. Like area denial frame GLs would only pick up one ammo, and they did talk about that being a bug, but like that's an insane sandbox issue to deal with when area denial frames have as big of a presence in the sandbox as they do right now. You have things that I talked about before, like Transcendence being harder to build. These sandbox reworks were just so hard to overcome. Holy, that is a massive reason why so many people didn't clear, was those sandbox reworks were just so punishing. Add on top of that, you have Contraband armor. The Contraband armor issue is insane. Make this a Moist Critical video. Put me on the thumbnail with the white t-shirt. The Contraband armor system is insane. If you did not have a set of mobility, intellect, or now weapon super armor, you couldn't hit damage. You just couldn't. You didn't need full 200, 100, but like the fact that there is no DPS oriented armor that we can farm in the current state of the game is utterly ridiculous. Like, to put this in perspective, imagine if like Final Shape launched and there were no darkness weapons. That's like a similar issue that we're having here with the Contraband armor. Like, imagine if darkness weapons were just removed from the sandbox before Final Shape launched, and so the only way you could farm Darkness Transcendence was by having weapons that you farmed before Final Shape came out. That is a similar level of issue that we're facing here, with Contraband armor being the only way that you could have competitive DPS. And I found that also insanely ridiculous. That is very dumb from a game design perspective. Moving on, the Encore situation is crazy. Why did we have 2 days of the best activity ever, and then they disabled it for like 23 hours, and then they re-enabled it but worse, and in the process removed the modifier that everybody loved, which was infinite grapples? That's just not okay. That's great. And so that led to a disparity where there were some people who were light level 300 because they had banged out the campaign really fast and just immediately started farming Encore. And there were some people who were only like 200 because they were like, okay, I'll farm Encore day 3. And it was gone. It was disabled for a day for some reason. So that's awesome, I guess. Skill issue. Moving on. because I don't want to rant about Encore anymore. You have the insane damage checks. Holy fuck, the damage checks were so insane. I talked before about how the phases were super long, but my team, the most damage we ever did to Hydra, and my team is a team of very consistent players, or was a team of consistent players. And we're not the greatest players there are. Like, we're not soloing raid bosses, but we are at a level of competent at the game where we should be able to clear a day one, right? Like, this team could beat Vow. This team could beat Crota. And we got the most damage we ever did to the Hydra was like 1/8 of its health bar in a full phase. Like, my bad, I guess. I'll improve that one in the future, I suppose. That's dumping all Thunderlord reserves, switching to Cloudstrike, dumping all Cloudstrike reserves. And we hit 1/8. Cool, I guess. Will improve in the future. I have been told this is bugged. Possibly bugged. I've seen the Destiny 2 team account post about it. I've seen individual QA testers from Bungie post about it. And I'm seeing differing opinions online. Some people are saying it's just hard because it's supposed to be hard, brah. Don't worry about it. Some people are saying we literally have definitive evidence that there is 37% less damage than there should be when you're shooting a thing. Like, I don't know. It might be bugged. And I honestly believe that it's bugged because I can't foresee them putting out a raid that is that insanely punishing for damage. And that's the last thing I wanted to rant about for the contest raid. Moving on to the normal raid, which I did clear. Thank God. If I hadn't been able to clear that, I think I may have just crashed out. All encounters are really fun. Even if the mechanics are a little bit punishing, every encounter felt very fun. Mechanics-wise, damage-wise, everything was really good for a raid. It was a very solid raid. This was not Ron. This is not a raid where things are just bad. It's a raid that is good. It was just punished by contest. The only complaints I have, and these are going to be very small nitpicks, is that in the Hydra rooms, when you're circling around the Hydras and shooting the eyes, there's very little cover. There should probably be more cover in those rooms. Also, during Wyvern, the imp swarms while you're climbing the platforms, why do they infinitely respawn? Why are you forcing me to use a blinding GL? Maybe we could just not have infinitely spawning imp swarms. Maybe we could just have, like, an imp swarm and then you kill it and then it goes away and it doesn't instantly respawn. That was a little weird. The final boss encounter is the coolest encounter Bungie has ever designed, bar none. Like, you walk into the arena and there's just, it's changed and there's a bunch of sand everywhere, and then you go interact with a Vex box, and then a massive boss the size of a building pops out of the ground that you can stand on while it's rising up. That's crazy. That is an awesome boss. I especially liked the move as a team of 3 and shoot mines where each person has a unique role that they have to fill, while the rest of the people in the arena also have things they can do. Nobody's just on ad clear. Everybody's doing something at every given moment. That's very solid. That is the final boss of Perpetual Desert is one of, if not the best boss encounters ever designed. I do have a nitpick though, because of course I will. So the boss's laser attacks are wildly random, and their AoE is very deceptive. It shoots a laser on the ground that can randomly reverse trajectory, go in and out. Two lasers. It shoots two lasers on the ground that can randomly reverse trajectory, go in and out. And by in and out, I mean it can be close to the boss crit, it can be far from the boss crit. And that feels weird. The witness attacks were all telegraphed, they were all patterns. And that was like the important part about witness attacks. Because then, once you learned them, you could execute your DPS better. These attacks were not. They were completely random, and they felt really weird to deal with. And then they also left an AoE on the ground. So if you didn't have a well up, or a Titan with a barricade protecting you from splash damage, you would just die to the laser that used to be there and isn't there anymore, which felt really stupid, especially when you had two lasers sync up and just burn the ground around the entire circle with no way to dodge it during damage. So that was really fun. Skill issue, I guess. Also, the crit. Why is it moving? We're already having to deal... I did the math, and this is very rough napkin math, but in the old system, it looks like we would have had to deal around 40 million damage to kill that boss. Why is the crit moving when we have to deal 40 million damage? You could have me in a box with nothing stopping me from shooting a crit the size of a barn, and dealing 40 million damage would still be a challenge. So why is the crit moving? Why are we being attacked by very random lasers? DPS extension was cool. I fuck with DPS extension, especially when you hit all three and it's like that extra period of extended DPS is pretty long, so it feels very rewarding to hit the triple extension. But the randomness, as always, is killing me. Notable hater of RNG hates RNG yet again. Everyone's shocked. Anyway, the desync also makes the desync makes DPS feel a little inconsistent, unfortunately. Like, I picked up red once and put it in the red portal and got feedback that I had put it in the red portal, and then damage phase ended. Like, okay, I guess. That sucks. My friend picks up blue. He puts it in the portal. He lives far away from me. Damage phase ends. The peer-to-peer situation is crazy, is all I'll say about that. That is unfortunate. However, I am going to end it on a positive note. The normal raid is excellent. It is a 10 out of 10 raid, up there in S tier with Salvation's Edge. It is a very, very good raid. The rad team cooked, as always. It just sucks that the damage didn't feel like it was tuned where it should have been. But that's just my personal opinion. So let me know if I'm coping. Let me know if I'm just an unk and I'm horrible at the game and I should just uninstall or go back to PvP, which is just like completely fucked anyway. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the day one raid. This is completely unedited. I am making it a point not to edit this this audio track, and that's about all I have to say. Even if you didn't clear, still praise God. Subscribe.